Michael had been working at the city hospital as a night shift nurse for years. The hospital, built over a century ago, had a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in town. But Michael, a man of science, never believed in ghosts. One stormy night, the emergency ward was unusually quiet. Michael was assigned to monitor the ICU, which had only one patient, a comatose elderly man named Mr. Harvey. The ward lights flickered as the storm outside grew more violent. Michael tried to ignore the unsettling atmosphere and focused on his paperwork. Around midnight, he heard faint whispers. At first, he thought it was a nurse nearby, but when he looked around, the corridor was empty. Shrugging it off as his imagination, Michael returned to his desk. But then, he saw it. Mr. Harvey's bed monitor showed irregular movements. Alarmed, Michael rushed to the patient's room, but Mr. Harvey was lying still, unresponsive as ever. As Michael checked his vitals, he noticed something chilling. The old man's hand twitched, and a weak whisper escaped his lips, "Don't let him in." Michael froze, his heart pounding. He turned to leave the room and call for help, but the door slammed shut on its own. Trapped, he tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The room grew colder, and the lights flickered violently. Suddenly, Michael felt a heavy presence behind him. When he turned around, he saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of Mr. Harvey's bed. Its face was featureless, but its presence exuded pure malice. The shadow raised a hand and pointed at Michael. Terrified, Michael screamed and banged on the door. The other nurses heard his cries and rushed to his aid. When they finally opened the door, Michael was found trembling on the floor. Mr. Harvey's bed was empty, he had passed away. From that night onward, Michael never worked the night shift again. He couldn't shake the memory of the shadowy figure or Mr. Harvey's chilling warning. The hospital staff claimed it wasn't the first time such an incident had occurred in the ICU. Lisa was an ambitious young woman working at a high-pressure advertising firm in New York. She often stayed late at the office to meet deadlines, long after her colleagues had left. The office building, a towering skyscraper, was mostly deserted after 10 p.m. One night, Lisa was working on a critical presentation for a demanding client. The clock struck midnight, and she realized she was completely alone on the 23rd floor. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. As Lisa typed away, she heard the faint sound of a keyboard clacking. Thinking someone else was working late, she called out, "Hello? Who's there?" There was no reply, but the clacking continued. Lisa stood up and walked toward the cubicles, following the sound. The office lights flickered as she moved, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She reached the source of the sound, but the cubicle was empty. Suddenly, her computer screen went black, and her phone buzzed with a text message. The message read, "Why are you still here?" Lisa's blood ran cold. She looked around, but there was no one in sight. She tried to call security, but her phone's signal was gone. Panicking, Lisa grabbed her bag and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw a dark figure standing in the distance, staring at her. The elevator descended, but halfway down, it stopped abruptly, and the lights went out. Lisa screamed, trapped in the pitch-black cabin. Then, she heard breathing, heavy and deliberate, right behind her. When the elevator doors finally opened, she bolted out and reported the incident to security. The guards reviewed the CCTV footage, but there was no sign of anyone else on the 23rd floor. Lisa quit her job the next day, unable to bear the thought of ever stepping into that building again. Sam was a foreman at an old textile factory that had been operating since the 1940s. The factory was known for its history, including a tragic accident where several workers had lost their lives. Despite the stories, Sam dismissed them as rumors meant to scare new employees. One night, while overseeing the late shift, Sam noticed something unusual. One of the machines in the corner of the factory was running, even though it had been shut down hours ago. He called out to the workers, who turned that machine on. But no one admitted to it. Sam walked over to the machine and turned it off. As he did, he felt a cold breeze, even though all the windows were closed. He brushed it off and continued his rounds. Later that night, Sam saw a figure standing near the machine, a woman wearing an old-fashioned factory uniform. He approached her, but as he got closer, she disappeared into thin air. Sam's heart raced as he realized she looked exactly like a woman in an old photo hanging in the break room. The workers noticed Sam's pale face and asked him what was wrong. When he described what he had seen, one of the older employees nodded solemnly. "That's Clara," he said. "She died in an accident decades ago. People say she still works here." Sam laughed nervously, trying to dismiss the story. But as the night went on, more machines started turning on and off by themselves. The factory lights flickered, and the sound of a woman humming echoed through the building. Sam couldn't ignore it anymore. He left the factory early and refused to return for the night shift. Clara's ghost, it seemed, was still dedicated to her work, even in death. These true stories remind us that workplaces, no matter how modern or mundane, can hold secrets from the past. Whether it's a hospital, an office, or a factory, you never know what, or who, might still linger. If you ever find yourself working late at night, remember to stay vigilant. Some employees never clock out, even after they're gone. And sometimes, the past has a way of making its presence known.